it's supposed to feel.
evening, everyone, and welcome to the June 2023 Council Agenda Briefing. Might just have a bit of quiet, please. Thank you so much. All right. So, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube, and I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality, and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, welcome. I declare this meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. The items for council, agenda items 2, 3, 6, 7, 8.1, 8.2, 9, 11, 13 and 14 will be dealt with at the ordinary council meeting to be held on 27 June 2023. That brings us to item 4, which is attendance. Item 4.1 is apologies. There's no apologies this evening. Item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence. And Councillor Mary Choi does have an approved leave of absence for the period of 17 June 2023 to 15 July 2023 inclusive. Moving on to item 5, which is declarations of interest. I've got an interest to declare. It's an impartiality interest on item 10.1.1 because I am a co-patron of the Wasps Hockey Club. So I thought I should declare that. Councillor Nick Warland has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.1.1. As in Councillor Warland's words, I know and have interacted with senior representatives of Wasps in a professional capacity through previous employment. Councillor Stephen Russell has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.1.1 as a family member has, is and may in the future be a member of the Wasps Hockey Club. As a consequence, there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected. I declare that I will consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly. And Councillor Nick Warland has also declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.1 as programmed property services interacted and had an ongoing commercial relationship with a previous employer throughout the duration of my employment there. Councillors or staff members, are there any further? Councillor Manolis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would also like to declare an impartiality into item 10.1.1 as I believe I may know people who live in the area close to the hockey.
Close to Richardson Park.
That's right.
Okay,
not Richardson
not
Park,
Richardson,
but
Collier, yes.
Collier Park, yes.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Manolis. Any further declarations of interest from anyone this evening? Councillor Navard.
My apologies for being late, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I would declare a similar interest to that of Councillor Manolis, that I too have spoken in campaigning with a number of people who lived very close to Collier Reserve and who...
right, and that's an impartiality interest, I assume, Councillor Navard?
Yes, it is.
All right. Welcome, Councillor Cridlin. We're just doing declarations of interest. Is there anything on the agenda that you wish to declare an interest in?
I do. We need some more parking. I couldn't park anywhere near. I had to park a kilometre away. So, first of all, I apologise I'm late. And secondly, 10.1.1, I wish to make an impartiality disclosure or declaration respect of that too, insofar as that's the reserve where either I or my wife walk our dog every day, and secondly, our children played junior hockey with the Wasps Club as well.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Any further declarations of interest this evening, councillors? Councillor, oh, there we go. And I take that that's a no. All right. Moving on to item 8, which is presentations. Item 8.3 is deputations, and this evening we have 8 speakers who will have up to 10 minutes each to address council. The first people that I'd like to invite to the microphone is Janesse Gardner and Lyle Kenny of South Perth, who are speaking against the officer recommendation on item 10.1.1. Welcome, Ms Gardner. Welcome, Mr Kenny.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you very much, councillors. Lyle and I will be speaking jointly on behalf of the whole of the Wasps Hockey Club, so all of the people here today. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you regarding our proposal for an artificial turf, grass and clubhouse facility at Collier Reserve. As introduced, my name is Janesse Gardner. I'm the president of the Wasps Hockey Club. Lyle Kenny is a life member and for the last 8 years has been our project lead for the turf proposal. We're a club of over 700 members and this is our 90th year of operation. We're 50% each male and female, half of our membership are juniors. And we need a facility that combines clubhouse, artificial turf and grass. We need a single place to call home where we develop our juniors on grass, play our emerging juniors, seniors and elite hockey on turf, host our social and masters games on grass and enable club socialisation throughout our membership at a clubhouse. Developing a turf is important to our members, which is why so many of them are here today and have written to you with their own stories about the importance of hockey in their lives and in this community. We don't have a turf in South Perth, so we don't have a home for all of our club members. Each year, hockey becomes more and more a turf sport. We are losing our sense of club unity and our connection to this community. 30 of our 40 teams play on turf. Nominally, our home turf is at Curtin Hockey Stadium, which does not provide a club room or grass. Our turf home matches are regularly fixtured in Melville or Southern River or Coburn, as we do not have our own facility, and our community sport needs are a second priority to the needs of elite sport at Perth Hockey Stadium. We also forego social and fundraising opportunities, sponsorship potential and bar takings. The motion before you from the City Admin effectively ends our project. It's also taken us by surprise, as previous discussions with the City Admin had indicated that this meeting would be an update for you. Putting our project on indefinite hold, as proposed in the officer's motion, means that the many years of work we've put into developing this proposal become out of date and would need to be fully redone. We want to take this project to public consultation, as we want to have the opportunity to work with other sports and community members to make this development work for our community. This is our second attempt at finding an agreed location for a turf in the city of South Perth. We spent years working unsuccessfully with the council to develop a turf at Richardson Park. Once a location and the project elements are approved by the city, discussion about funding and other collaborators can meaningfully commence. It's premature to seek funding at this time. It's unreasonable to ask a community sports club to fundraise before we have an in-principle approval for a location to build our turf. There are a number of potential sources of capital funding for this project, including our club members, Wesley College, Commonwealth Government, and yes, a contribution from the City of South Perth. We have provided considerable evidence regarding our ability to meet the ongoing operational and CapEx costs in our study, plus the various correspondence, and Lyle will provide further detail on this in a moment. Lyle will also provide detail about our steps to market test the facility costs, as we believe they are overly conservative. And given that I've got a microphone here, I'm going to move and let him have this seat. So.
Good evening, councillors. Great to see so many Wasps supporters filling the gallery, the foyer and the viewing area. I will respond to some of the specific comments raised in the City's recommendation item 10.1.1 and show that this project continues to have the same merit that the City recognised when it was included as a key action in the City's Community Recreation Facilities Plan in 2019, as well as when the preliminary feasibility was endorsed by the Council in November 2020. Indeed, we have progressed this project exactly as was contemplated and supported by the council in those documents. Since our detailed feasibility study was submitted to the city in November 22, there are exchanges of correspondence on several items, and a meeting was held with the city CEO and staff in May on the outstanding matters. I would urge the councillors to read that correspondence as provided as an attachment in our deputation application, as it deals with the issues raised by the city and our responses. Indeed, it's disappointing that in the administration's agenda comments, most of our responses have not been included. One of our letters dated the 23rd of May 23 is in the council papers at page 402, 403 and 404, which essentially describes the current situation, and I encourage councillors to focus on its contents as a useful guide. Time will preclude us from dealing with all issues raised, but we make the following comments on some key points. Financial viability has been addressed in detail in the feasibility study at Appendix K and answered again in correspondence with the city dated 2nd of March 23. A line-by-line assessment was done on the turf usage for all available training slots, game times, which flows into a facility revenue. The operating expenditures based on Hockey WA guidance was used, and a whole-of-life capital replacement sinking fund over a 20-year period, again based on Hockey WA indicative numbers, was utilised. Given the size of WASP and the college, this turf is fully self-funding facility. That is, the user's revenue covers the operating and capital costs entirely. This information has been provided to the city, further explained to the city, yet no queries or dispute on the assumptions have been received back other than the general statement, it's not viable. We absolutely dispute and seek details from the city. Based on WASP and the college being able to control the delivery of this community facility, the cost estimate of $14.8 million is, in our view, well exceeds the likely actual cost. The project's made up of three components, being an artificial hockey turf, a clubhouse and some infrastructure works. Hockey WA provides guidance on the likely hockey turf costs, and we have a quote for the surface from a provider. On that component, we have confidence. Notwithstanding our repeated efforts to obtain a market-based estimate from a builder in the last 12 months on the clubhouse cost, we have been unsuccessful to date. All builders are busy. However, we are in current discussions with an experienced builder and are confident that an estimate will be provided in the coming weeks. We expect the all-up estimate of these three components to be well below the $14.8 million stated by the QS. Regardless of the final cost estimate, we are not requesting the city to fund this project. We will be looking for a minority capital contribution, well less than the 1/3 mentioned in the agenda papers. It will be towards the shared elements of the infrastructure and the clubhouse. However, any contribution from the city will be de-risked by ensuring a condition on any city approval is that the facility cannot commence construction until it's fully funded to the city's satisfaction. There is no scenario where the city will be left with a half-built facility. The cost of the facility is an issue for the proponents, as the fundraising rests with WASP and the college, and it cannot raise the funds, it will not proceed. However, we cannot set about that fundraising task until we know this location and project has support from the city. The city has acknowledged that it has certain gaps in its provision of sporting infrastructure. It has a shortage of funds to contribute to these facilities and a need to seek partnerships and innovation to deliver such facilities. Partnering with WASP and the college is exactly the means to achieve a new community sporting facility with no ongoing OPEX or CAPEX exposure to the city. This project provides significant leverage for the city for a relatively modest capital contribution and accesses WASP and the college fundraising through sponsors, Commonwealth and membership sources. We would also make an observation that the RAF project has recently been cancelled, and as a result, our understanding there will be $10 million of reserve funds that could be directed to support community sporting clubs. Our project is well deserving of support for a small portion of those funds.
60 seconds, Mr. Kenny.
We would ask that the administration be requested to assess the city's capacity to make it a capital contribution to the Collier Reserve facility. We have been a project in development for some 4 to 5 years and have been supported along that journey by the city. The city's 10-year plan could be reviewed to assess if this project can be accommodated. In relation to the state-funded development of the Perth Hockey Stadium, we acknowledge that there will be no state funds for the Collier Reserve proposal. A redeveloped PHS will remain focused on elite hockey and will have no provision for grass grounds or a WASP-specific club room. From a WASP perspective, our basic objective of a combined holistic club comprising grass grounds, clubhouse and artificial turf cannot be achieved at PHS. We need a single home for all our members. Any arrangement at Perth Hockey Stadium will be a suboptimal outcome. We have done everything asked of us by the City Administration over the last 10 years. Collier Reserve is the only location that works in the City of South Perth.
That's time, I'm afraid, Mr Kenny. I will ask if there's any councillors that have any questions for you or Ms Gardner.
Can we just make the point, we're speaking on behalf of 700 members and supporters. We put forward one delegation, or one deputation, we could have put 20.
I appreciate that, but I can't extend the time beyond 10 minutes.
Isn't there the opportunity for the councillors to agree to that?
I don't think so under the standing orders. No, I've got to be fair to everyone, Mr Kenny. I am sorry. I was listening with interest, but I've got to be consistent. I've got to treat everyone the same. But elected members, does anyone have any questions for Ms Gardner or Mr Kenny? Councillor Russell.
Good evening. Thank you both for your deputation and in your feasibility report that's come to council. Look, I found it quite informative. Look, I have a number of technical and financial questions in relation to your report, so look, please bear with me if my questions seem somewhat ignorant. Look, I note that the report is silent with respect to the WAPC Development Control Policy 5.3, which is the use of land reserved for parks and recreational and regional open space, which is valid for Collier Reserve. The policy states that the WAPC may grant its approval amongst other considerations only where the sporting grounds and facilities, when not in club use, are available to the public with prior agreement where necessary with the sporting and social groups. So how or what is the intention of the WASPs and Wesley joint venture to comply with this, as I can't see any identified allowance for public use?
When you say public use, we are a grassroots community sporting club.
Thank you for that. If you could speak as close as you can to the microphone, that will help with other people being able to hear there.
Certainly. We're a grassroots community sporting club. So I'm not a planner. I don't know the specifics of that particular clause that you've mentioned, but we are like hundreds of other sporting clubs. It's open to anybody who wishes to join. So without knowing the specifics of that particular clause, without taking some advice from a planner, there's probably not much more response I can give you to that.
Okay, thank you. With respect to the lease arrangement with the city, I understand that... It's on.
I think they're saying they can't quite hear. Maybe if you can bring the microphone as close to your mouth as you can.
Okay. It is not, with respect to the lease arrangement with the city, I understand that you're looking for a 21 plus 21 or a 25 plus 25 term.
Mm-hmm.
Are you proposing the lease for Collier Reserve, which is lot 502 in its entirety, which consequently includes the car park and the nursery?
The lease is intended to cover the area of the facilities, given that the capital contribution is largely coming from non-city sources, and so there needs to be certainty of tenure for those capital improvements to be constructed and for the funds to be raised. So it's intended to cover the certainly the footprint of the turf and the clubhouse. That's the intention.
Not the grassed areas then? The proposed grass pitch, I think you call it number 1.
Yes, no, intention would be to cover the improvements where the funds need to be raised to build the clubhouse and the turf.
Okay, thank you. I believe the proposed per annum lease to the city is $20,000. Now that's in your operational cost model. How did the JV come to 20,000 Ks per annum? Or $20,000, sorry, per annum?
Yeah, there was an estimate put in there in anticipation of receiving some feedback from the city, for which there's been none.
Okay, thank you. Again, looking at the life cycle costs of the proposal, does the costing include for the disposal of the stadium and returning the site to its existing condition at the end of the term?
No.
No? Okay, thank you. Again, in year 18 of the sinking fund, it seems to be that there's a renewal shortfall of $92,000 in year 18. So to me, that means that the JV needs to find $92,000 outside of the operating cost model. So how will the JVs, what's the intention of the JV to fill that shortfall?
On a whole of life basis, carrying forward each surpluses each year and deficiencies in year on a whole of life basis, we see that it's fully funding.
But the operating model does say there's a $92,000 shortfall in year 18.
And there's previous surpluses, so when you carry forward and accumulate those on a whole of life basis,
Okay,
it's self-funding.
right, okay, it's actually, okay. So I understand that the JV is looking to the city ratepayers to fund capital works, some minor works, and which includes lighting. Includes lighting. Is that lighting to the synthetic turf and to the grassed pitch area?
Yes.
Okay, so I see that the sinking fund component for the lighting is for the turf only. So who's responsible for funding the cleaning and renewal costs for the grass pitch lighting?
That's an operating expense that sits within the proponents.
Okay, thank you. So again, on the lighting, I understand that only one grass pitch has lighting.
Yes.
Okay, which that doesn't seem to match the winter hockey pitch schedule where more than one grass pitch is being used between 5 and 6 p.m. So could you please clarify this discrepancy, as it would seem that either additional lighting is required or your operating model needs to be reduced in some manner, your operating cost model?
Well, the grass you're talking about, the grass training would be in that area only where the 3 lights have been provided.
That's correct. And so
Yes.
between, I'm not sure which it is, I think it might be Tuesday or Wednesdays,
Yes.
during the 5 to 6 p.m, you have more than one pitch being utilised at that time,
The grass ground?
the grass ground.
Yeah.
So which means you either need an additional pitch to be lit,
Yes.
or your operating model or the costing needs to be reduced to match.
Yeah, there is only intention to have lighting to that one grass ground, and so the training will need to tailor into that availability of the one grass ground.
Okay, thank you. The artificial turf, does that require watering during hot weather when not in use in order to maintain its condition?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. Also, just the last question. Under the capital costs, there's an exclusion to the reticulation of the playing fields. Could you elaborate what that is? Is the city responsible for the costing to reconfigure the reticulation system?
No.
It's not. It's excluded from the cost model, from the capital cost model. So who is responsible for that then?
The proponents would be responsible for that.
Okay, so it's not in the costing model.
I can't recall each line item, but if it's not in there, it would need to be in there to for the proponents to reconfigure the reticulation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions for Ms Gardner or Mr Kenny? Councillor Cridland?
I'm sorry I can't take you to line items, as well as Councillor Russell. As I understand the genesis of this project, it came about because you wanted to have a turf so you could play your home matches on turf? No, it's a big part of it, but it's certainly not all of it. The objective is to have the club holistic, which means a clubhouse, a turf that we can control, and grass grounds. And those are the 3 fundamental components. It's not just about a turf. And you originally proposed to the city having a turf down at Richo, so you would have all of those? Yes. And the city indicated to you that, no, look elsewhere, try Collier.
not specifically try Collier, but no, look elsewhere.
And that's because the kids and your adults play at Joondalup and Southern River for their home games.
On turf, yes, we play, we're nomadic everywhere.
Now, I saw in the report that there are there's a reference to the baseball club, the South Perth Baseball Club.
Yes.
Are there issues with them as far as a disagreement as to the club relocating from Richo to Collier?
Yes, and there's been some extended dealings with the baseball club. They are a user and have a third diamond that is located on Collier Reserve. It's not a full-sized diamond. It's I think used for juniors. It's not big enough to be a full-sized diamond. So our starting point in considering the issues at Collier Reserve was to try and ensure a win-win outcome. Dealing with the baseball club, we respect they're a fellow long-standing grassroots community sporting club. But the communication was been fairly difficult. Meetings organised and cancelled. Meeting was held. Correspondence between us. Eventually, we got to September 22, when a draft memorandum of understanding was provided to the baseball club, and there's some information in the detailed feasibility, page 48 and 49. Basically, what we were able to provide was a third full-sized diamond, which backs up against the new clubhouse, faces west. There was also the opportunity for use of the change rooms in the new clubhouse, and also storage and access to the lights over the grass ground that we're proposing to install. So that was for no capital cost to the baseball club, but it was for running costs only. So we felt that was a win-win and a very successful outcome. That was presented to the baseball club in September 22. Since then, we've had no acceptance, we've had no refusal, we've had very little engagement other than they'll get back to us. So basically since September 22, follow up again from us in October, November, December, emails, phone call, SMS, there has been no definitive response. Again, early this year, when the feasibility was presented, it was indicated by the council that the baseball club had indicated they didn't support our proposal. So we again made overtures and made contact with the baseball club. But again, an acknowledgement that they'd received my communication and they get back to us, but we've received in that recent times no response from the baseball club to 4 or 5 different follow-ups, emails, phone calls, SMS. We invited the city to initiate a meeting with the baseball club. That didn't happen. We have copied in Patrick Quigley from the city on those correspondence, so he's aware of the overtures and the attempts that we've made to attempt to resolve things with the baseball club. So it's disappointing. I'm puzzled. I think it provides a win-win outcome. I can only conclude that if they think by not responding that basically will go away.
Is there a season overlap between baseball and hockey?
Not in fixturing. In terms of any winter and summer sport, there's always some overlap between a pre-season of one and the finish of another. But if we had agreement with them on what we're proposing, their number 1 and number 2 diamond is not compromised at all. And in fact, we provide a third diamond for them. So the overlap is not seen really as an issue.
So it would be similar to the situation you're at Richo with the South Perth Cricket Club?
Yeah, that's right, and many and varied sporting grounds around the city where summer and winter sports interact at the overlap time.
I have no more questions of the presenter.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, any further questions for Ms Gardner or Mr Kenny? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I just take you up on that third diamond? So I understand the third diamond, does that sit northeast on Collins Oval, or does it sit on the hockey pitch number 1?
It sits possibly astride Collier Reserve and certainly goes into Collins.
Okay.
And sits up against the, western side of the proposed clubhouse. So whether there's some small portion on Collier Reserve, certainly most of it would sit on Collins Oval facing west.
So how does that work then when you've got light poles on pitch number 1?
The map and the plan that's in the detail FISO at page 49 shows the layout and how it works.
Oh yeah, but you've got lighting on pitch number 1, and
Yes.
the diamond will be sitting on that or partially on that. I'm not too sure.
No, the poles sit outside of that. The plan shows how it works.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillors, any further questions for our deputies this evening? That's a no. Thank you very much for your deputation. I'd now like to invite Ms Kay Poe of Como, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 10.1.1. Welcome, Ms Poe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, everyone. I am a City of South Perth resident and a representative of the community group, the Friends of Collier Reserve. I'm here today to voice our opposition to the WASP hockey proposal due to it being financially unfeasible and to express our concerns about the detrimental impact it will have on the community through the loss of public open space. Before I proceed, I would like to respectfully remind elected members that a petition with 480 signatures opposing this development was presented to Council on 14th December 2021. The community strongly opposed this proposal, and we ask that Council take our views and concerns into consideration before casting your vote next week. Public open spaces and natural urban environments like Collier Reserve are not merely patches of land. They hold immense value for our community. They provide sport, recreation, and nature opportunities that promote physical and mental well-being, foster social connection, and provide respite in nature. In light of the City of South Perth's commitment to accommodating population growth through the creation of 8,300 additional dwellings as outlined in the Local Planning Scheme number 7, and in response to the infill targets set by the state government, the importance of public open spaces becomes even greater. Preserving the public open space of Collier Reserve is vital, especially considering nearby land has been earmarked for high-density development as part of the Bentley Curtin Specialised Activity Centre. Collier Reserve is a cherished multi-purpose space that is shared by many user groups from our community. This includes the various sports clubs who play baseball, soccer, and cricket on the fields, and the broader community who use the green space for exercise, informal sports, and social gatherings. It is also a popular place for families and children to play frisbee or throw a ball, and for dog owners to walk and exercise their dogs. It is important to highlight that Moresby, among the 4 wards, has the highest percentage of dog ownership, with 1,430 registered dogs. But surprisingly, it has the least off-leash dog exercise space within the city. The elimination of approximately 7,000 square meters of dog exercise area will disproportionately disadvantage this major user group. Natural spaces like Collier Reserve offer a much-needed escape from the hustle and bustle of the modern world. During times of lockdowns and restrictions, this parkland was a sanctuary for the community. Even now, it continues to provide a peaceful retreat for people to unwind and recharge. Reducing the public open space at Collier Reserve will diminish the diverse range of sports, recreational, and nature opportunities it currently provides. The proponents' intentions to construct a fence facility with 7-meter-high chain mesh fencing, a 2-story clubhouse, and a total of 9 lighting towers on the reserve will negatively impact all existing user groups. As depicted on this map, it will lead to a substantial reduction in usable space, and the intensified sports usage across the 2 green spaces on the 4 hockey grass pitches and 2 soccer fields will subsequently restrict public access to the remaining available area. Currently, the city manages the land at Collier Reserve, enabling community groups to lease the space directly from them. If the proposal is approved, Wesley College could potentially acquire management rights for this land. This would give one private school control over a large portion of the city's public open space. This single-use facility will exclusively benefit the Wasp Hockey Club and Wesley College. It is vital for councillors to recognise that only 50% of the club's members reside in the city of South Perth, meaning that only 379 residents and ratepayers will directly benefit from this facility. Approving this development would lead to an unfair distribution of a community resource favouring a small, privileged group over the broader community. Moreover, the substantial cost of $14.8 million exceeds the proponent's available funds for both the initial capital cost and ongoing expenses. This highlights the financial risk and impracticality of the development. Additionally, it is unreasonable to expect the city to invest funds that are currently unavailable into a facility that does not provide benefits to the wider community. During these challenging financial times, it is crucial for councillors to exercise prudence in their decision-making. The Wasps Hockey Club has the option to remain at Richardson Reserve, where they can still access the clubhouse and grass pitches. Additionally, they could utilise the synthetic turf at the new High Performance Hockey Centre located nearby at Curtin University. The club's desire to have their own synthetic turf located next to their clubhouse and grass pitches should be regarded as a luxury rather than a necessity, particularly given the scarcity of suitable land for such projects in the district. This proposal should not progress further in any way, shape, or form. Councillors, you have the power to vote for what is just and fair. Please reject this proposal so that we can keep Collier Reserve available to all. Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation, Ms Poe. Before you leave, though, I might ask if any elected members would like to ask you any questions. Councillors, do we have any questions for Ms Poe this evening? Councillor Credland.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms Poe. I noted that one of the things that you emphasised in your presentation was about financial feasibility of the project. Would you agree that that issue would be dealt with if the applicant was not permitted to proceed unless they could show that they had adequate funding to actually make the project work?
What do you mean, sorry?
Well, you've just listened to the previous presentation.
Yes.
In which the club disputed that there was any lack of financial viability in the project, and they suggested that a condition of approval be that they can't commence any construction unless they can prove that they have funding for the capital expenditure and the operational ongoing costs. Wouldn't that deal with the financial viability?
Sorry to interrupt. From our perspective, they had a lot of time to prepare this feasibility study and come back to the city to demonstrate that they're able to do so. And nothing in the report or the study indicates that they can. And also in light of the fact that the state government has invested $135 million for a high-performance hockey centre, essentially just down the road from Collier Reserve, to make that available to the wider community as well as the elite teams, I don't think they're able to secure that additional funding that easily. So my point of view is they've had the opportunity to do that and they haven't. So there is really not much point in giving them more time to try and demonstrate that they can source this funding. And in addition to that, they're asking the city to use ratepayers' money to co-fund this, but it's a single-use sporting facility. There is no benefit, honestly, to the wider community or the local community for that matter. So why are we giving up space for something that they cannot afford, right? for such a small, I guess, demographic within our city. It makes no sense.
Right. And you also understand that most of our community facilities are single use and set aside for specific, as you would call it, privileged groups, whether they're bridge players or croquet players or tennis players or bowls players. In fact, almost all of our facilities are single use. You understand that?
Yes, but I also understand that they probably don't cost $14.8 million. And to remove that amount of space from a public reserve that is used and loved and cherished by the community, that seems really unfair to me.
And all those other single-use facilities are also on
Well, I'm sure the
public
city
reserves.
has also examined all those cases, and the community has had the opportunity to voice their concerns.
Do you think there would be any public amenity benefit for the people of South Perth as a community if the kids who play hockey didn't have to travel an hour to play home games at Joondalup and Southern River and could do that in South Perth?
Sure, well, they wouldn't have to with the new high performance hockey centre at Curtin. That is so near Collier Reserve that you can walk there, right? And it's so near Richardson Reserve as well. The point is they have access to grass fields, they have access to clubhouse, and the potential to use this high performance area, right, is there. But they choose not to explore that because they want everything co-located, which is a luxury.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, do we have any further questions for Ms Poe this evening? No. Thank you for your deputation, Ms Poe.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Mike and Jane Morrissey of Como. They are speaking for the officer recommendation at item 10.1.1. Welcome, Mr and Mrs Morrissey.
Good evening. Ours is quite brief compared to most and no PowerPoints or anything. Good evening, Mayor and councillors. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. We're long-standing City of South Perth residents and frequent users of Collier Reserve. We walk our dog there every day, at least once. We're representatives from the community group Friends of Collier Reserve also. We're here tonight to express our concerns about the Wasp Hockey proposal and the impact this development would have on the local residents if it were to proceed because of insufficient parking, increased traffic and noise, and its financial implications to ratepayers. The first one I'd like to talk about, insufficient parking. There is limited parking in the area and it is used by existing sporting clubs such as football and baseball clubs. During weekly sporting events, residents experience a lot of illegal verge parking as car parks are full to the brim, leaving the local streets congested and difficult to access. The feasibility report indicates that there is insufficient parking for WASP and that additional parking would be needed. Allowing the WASP development to proceed without a parking upgrade would be problematic. On the traffic, Collier Reserve is located next to the city's operational centre and recycling transfer station. There are 3 schools in the neighbourhood and several sporting clubs. Thelma Street, Murray Street and Ryrie Avenue are narrow residential streets. They would be greatly impacted by servicing another large sporting complex. They already carry large volumes of assorted traffic, including heavy vehicles, such as commercial trucks, school buses and drop-off pickups for the schools. At various times of the day, it is almost impossible to cross these suburban streets to access the parkland and kids' play areas. The city conducted a traffic count on Ryrie Avenue in late July 2022 and indicated that on average 5,432 vehicles pass through this small road daily. Main roads have marked the Canning Highway Ryrie Avenue intersection a black spot and will be taking action to restrict through traffic. The introduction of a major hockey club with 700 plus members and growing into the area, and the intense utilisation of the proposed hockey facility by Wasp and Wesley College would significantly increase the traffic movement on local roads. Their schedule indicates that the turf facility and grass pitches would be utilised every day by Wasp and Wesley College. There would be multiple hockey sessions scheduled at different times of the day and night for their 12 different player groups.
That's it, that's me now.
I'll hand it over to my wife and she can have the mic.
Thank you. Okay, noise. We would like to bring it to your attention that when the South Perth Tennis Club was relocated to Como, it was put in an area that did not impact local Como residents. They run night tennis under lights, have a bar licence and a hall for hire, which does not impact anyone. Wasps' intention to use the turf and grass pitches every day as early as 6:30 a.m. during weekdays and 8 a.m. during the weekends, and every night of the week up until as late as 10 p.m. raises serious concerns about the impact of noise to nearby residents. Residents who live on Thelma Street can attest that sports noise is audible inside the house when sport is being played on Collier Reserve and Collins Oval. Currently, there is no lighting on both ovals, so sport play is restricted to daytime only. For this reason, they do not present any issue. The acoustic report submitted by the proponents claim that the background noise levels generated by the hockey club would be marginally higher given that the current acoustic environment of Thelma Street, which is dominated by vehicle movements. While this may be true during the day, the report fails to take into account that traffic movement at night are significantly less on the streets. Therefore, noise emission associated with hockey activities on the fields, cars in car parks, crowds, whistles, sirens, and general noise from games and training would be prominent at night and in the early hours of the morning. Additional concerns about noise from the clubhouse, which would be licensed and serve alcohol to crowds of people, was not assessed. There is a serious concern over noise impact on the daily lives of local residents, many of which are young families and shift workers. Affordability. Cost of living is at its highest right now, and many households struggling to cope with inflation and high interest rates. The prospect of council rates going up will add financial pressures for all ratepayers and will impact the affordability of living in our beautiful district. In conclusion, we ask that the councillors take our concerns and recommendation of your council into consideration before you cast your vote. These precious areas should remain for all to use and not just a select group. Thank you for the opportunity to make this deputation.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Morrissey. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr. I still have to ask. Do we have any questions for Mr. and Mrs. Morrissey tonight?
I did well to get through this. It is, thank you. No, if you've got any questions, but I don't know if I've got any.
No questions?
You're good.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation. Okay, I'd now like to welcome Ms. Louise Johnston of Como, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 10.1.1. Welcome, it's Dr. Johnston, isn't it?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councillors. I am a City of Perth, or South Perth resident, and a representative from the community group, the Friends of Collier Reserve. I'm here today to express our strong opposition to the Wasp hockey proposal on the basis that it conflicts with the city's commitment to, and I quote, actively manage and promote sustainable water, waste, land and energy practices as outlined in the Strategic Community Plan. I'd like to talk about environmental issues, hopefully not too much detail, but I think these are maybe more important than we tend to give credence to. It is only with responsible decision-making in urban planning projects that we can hope to have a positive impact on critical environmental issues such as climate change, water shortages, and the degradation of natural spaces that support local biodiversity. I would like to share with you the negative implications of removing natural grass from a park such as Collier Reserve and installing approximately 5,000 square metres of artificial synthetic land cover. First, it is known that synthetic turf generates much higher temperature levels during summertime, often up to 40 to 50%, more than a natural grass field. An asphalt environment can even surpass 70 degrees centigrade during a heat wave, making the vicinity unsafe to use and the urban locality much hotter. In contrast, urban green spaces like Collier Reserve actually serve to cool the environment and reduce what is called the heat island effect. Natural grass combined with tree canopies have been found to decrease daytime temperatures by up to 6 degrees during extreme summer conditions. So it is with great consternation that we learn that the proposal requires the removal of 43, I repeat, 43 mature trees from Collier Reserve. Natural features which are not only visually beautiful, but are also essential in supporting bird life and for cooling the local area and its inhabitants. Secondly, there are various environmental problems associated with laying and maintenance of asphalt turf, including damage to the local microenvironment, essential biodiversity and natural habitats. For example, research shows that microplastics commonly travel from synthetic turf into local water systems, resulting in residues of toxic, polluting substances harmful to both humans and animal life. In addition, we know that the asphalt turf needs to be replaced about every 10 years, which would result in large amounts of non-biodegradable material going into landfill. Thirdly, it is commonly known that Perth has a dwindling supply of groundwater. Our former Director of Development and Community Services, Vicky Lummer, recently stated, and I quote, "There could be a cut of up to 10% in our water allocation. This means quite a lot for us. It will mean we will have to be even tougher with how we allocate water to the city. We really have worked hard in the last 20 years or so to minimise our water use, but I believe things are going to get worse." Yet the hockey community appears to want to ignore our water shortage concerns by introducing synthetic turfs that require year-round watering in order to maintain a high standard of playing conditions. Even in the feasibility report, it is estimated that the synthetic turf will require 4,250 kilolitres of water per annum. That is to say, we would be using precious and limited water resources to water plastic rather than the natural grass which serves to offset our summer heat. In conclusion, the community looks to the City of South Perth and our representative members to provide constant and continual leadership in the management of climate change and local environmental issues. Indeed, responsibility rests with each and every individual to resist current and future degradation of our shared natural environment. We thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your deputation, Dr. Johnston. Councillors, do we have any questions for Dr. Johnston this evening? Councillor Credland.
Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Johnston. And I think you may have presented earlier because I remembered some of the points that you'd made. One of the ones that you made was in respect of sustainable use of water, given that Perth has, on a long-term basis, a declining rainfall, although you wouldn't believe it last night. Now, I'm just wondering, does it actually make any difference whether the water is being placed on plastic AstroTurf here in South Perth or on a facility in Joondalup or Southern River, which is where they play their home games now? it's the same amount of water being used for the same amount of games. There's not going to be any additional water used, is there?
I suppose the discussion is more to do with how many asphalt turfs do we need in Perth? Now, I'm not an expert in this. Information that we managed to gather suggested that there were 17. So, 17 turfs that are consuming large amounts of water. We may say, well, it's appropriate that people who wish to play hockey, and that's completely reasonable and acceptable. Why do we need to add another one which is going to consume further resources? So I think it's not about where people play. I think it's about saying, do we really need yet another pitch right in the centre of the city in order for a sports group to pursue their activities when we understand very clearly that we need this land for a whole wide range of other activities, and that there is already sufficient facilities available in many different parts of Perth in order to accommodate this club already.
And that gets me on to my next question for you, because you've spoken about sustainable energy practices as being important. Would you agree that there is a significant benefit if the parents of the kids don't have to spend 2 hours driving to and from their home games in Joondalup, and in fact can play in their local community because they're saving all that fuel?
I think in an ideal world, definitely. If I were a parent and I had children who were passionate about hockey or any other sport, yes, it's onerous. Having said that, if we compare the proximity of sports facilities to our general neighbourhoods and look at what it's like in other countries, the actual travel distances are much smaller. And perhaps you could argue that this is, if there's a commitment there to pursuing sports of a certain type, then this is a sacrifice or compromise that has to be made. I know in some areas in Melbourne, for example, some of the residential communities around sports areas have even become popular residential locations for people who are fully involved in that local sport. So if you're a coach or a trainer, or you have 5 children who want to become top level elite hockey players, they have made a commitment to move closer. Well, that is an exception rather than the rule, but I think that is difficult for families who want to pursue sports, but that could be the same for any sport. I don't think hockey or Collier Park or any of the local facilities represents any greater hardship than any other.
And my final question was, you're speaking as a member of the Friends of Collier Oval or Park?
Park, correct.
Yes. And you've heard the first presenter tonight. I don't know what the numbers were, but I think it was around 700 or 750 members
Correct.
of WASPs. How many members are there in the Friends of Collier Park group?
We include everybody who supports maintaining the park in its current state, or at least as a public open space with green facilities, which includes potential for all people, whether they've paid their subscription fees, they own a pair of hockey boots, it doesn't matter. Friends are not a club or a group. You could really almost say we're not so much a lobby group even. We're just interested in doing what makes sense in terms of a natural environment, what makes sense in terms of the financial situation that we're currently in at the moment, in terms of recognising that this park was set aside originally for recreation for all people. That is, everybody in the community, no matter what your interest or preference or how you spend your weekends, anybody that supports that is considered a friend of Collier Reserve.
Sure, but are you able to answer the question about how many members there are?
We're not a membership group.
To the gallery, there is a person making a deputation. That's the person being asked the questions. So no interjections from the gallery, please. Sorry, Dr. Johnston, you can.
No, that's quite all right. Yes, we're not a formal group. In terms of our discussions with each other, we need some sort of nomenclature, if you like, in order to talk about what we're doing and who we are and to introduce ourselves to people. So there is no official membership. Okay.
Councillors, any further questions for Dr. Johnston? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for your presentation, your deputation tonight. I have a slightly technical question, and maybe you won't have the ability to answer it, but I was just wondering if you could share some of the concerns with regard to the actual construction of the acrylic synthetic turf and the concerns around that with regard to microplastics. If you could share any of that, thank you.
Yes, part of the process of coming to understand what the situation was at Collier Reserve, we did a fair amount of research into asphalt and what some of the issues are associated with it. I certainly have no technical scientific background on which I can comment with authority, but the overriding information that seemed to come through was that there would be pollutants and contamination involved. In terms of construction, the type of time period that is estimated for the construction of the sort of facilities that the hockey club is talking about seem to be extremely long. I believe the process is quite complex. It's quite has all sorts of requirements in terms of the density, the weight, the kind of quality that's needed in order to provide the right, if you like, flexibility for hockey players and human needs in terms of moving them onto a surface that can be, well, doesn't damage limbs, doesn't break up easily. Other than that, I can't comment further. I don't have that technical knowledge.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Any further questions for Dr. Johnston this evening, councillors? No. Thank you for your deputation, Dr. Johnston.
Thank you for your time.
I'd now like to invite Mr. Murray Rosenberg of Como, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 10.1.1. Welcome, Mr. Rosenberg.
Good evening, councillors and Mayor. In regards to my PowerPoint presentation, what do? Do I just press this button?
Try it and see.
Sorry, which, the red button?
I assume so. I've never been on that side of the...
Sorry. Okay, we're all up there. Thank you.
All right, great.
We're talking about Collier Reserve, which is a beautiful patch of grass surrounded by magnificent trees. And I'm here to support the council's recommendation to keep this patch of grass and leave it for the wider community rather than utilise it for one hockey club. Oh, I got the arrow. Okay, I got it. Thanks. Well, Collier Reserve is situated as part of 3 ovals, and you can see in this picture here that Collier Reserve is the one at the end, situated between Thelma Street and the Collier Golf Course. I've highlighted Wesley College for the middle oval because Wesley College has a lease agreement with the City of South Perth, so it effectively kind of manages that area, and may, if this goes ahead, manage the other oval, which is Collier Reserve. I'm not saying that will happen, but who knows, it may. Current uses of the park, well, I think we've mentioned before, look, these parks are really important for people's mental and physical health as a place of recreation. I think if we link this to the current town planning scheme, which is going to result in higher density in the community, which I'm all for. Look, fair enough, we don't want the sprawling suburbs. I'm okay with that. But I think as a consequence of that, we need to make sure that we retain these public parks for the community to use. So this is very important, as we noticed in the COVID time, that people need these parks for their mental health and for recreation, and just simply walking around and enjoying nature, as we've heard before. It is used by other clubs. I've walked around there quite regularly, and in summertime you'll see the little children playing cricket. It's just masses of children all over that park learning how to play cricket, which it's wonderful to see. You also see the baseball players playing baseball, and then in wintertime the nets come up, the soccer nets come up, and you see the men playing, usually men, playing soccer. So it's used by a variety of clubs, and it's wonderful to see. And then, of course, there's maybe family outings where a father might just be out there trying to teach their daughter how to fly a kite. Who knows? Or just playing in the soccer area there. And these clubs, they use the whole area. They don't just use a part of it. They use the whole area, especially the soccer groups and the cricket club. And then again, it may be just a nice place to sit and relax by a park bench and enjoy the beautiful nature and the quiet space there. The South Perth Council policy talks about improving public spaces, public open spaces. I think if this was to go ahead, it would be a loss of public space. It wouldn't be an improvement at all. It would be a loss to the public. Okay, it'd be a great thing for one hockey club, but it'd be a loss to the public. Well, the West Australian and South Perth Hockey Club, they currently have their hockey facilities at Richardson Oval. They have a clubhouse, they have a number of hockey fields, and of course, as I've said, they want a place where they can have their synthetic turf. They also have their licensed club rooms. And the plan is to move to Collier Reserve. That's one of the options. That's the option they're looking at the moment. So with the move to Collier Reserve, they plan to have a licensed clubhouse, synthetic turf, all surrounded by a high fence. Now, this high fence is symbolic to me. It says to me, I know the sign's up there, public keep out, synthetic turf, hockey only. From what we've got now as a park, which is open to all the public, we've got a club taking over, which is excluding a large part of the public. And as we've heard before, nearly a lot of the people in this hockey club don't even live in South Perth. So this will bring bright lights. There'll be lots of cars and noise, and of course, hockey, as we know, is a winter sport. It will be largely used in winter. So the public will not only be excluded in the summer, you'll have this hockey field there surrounded by this high fence, and no one will be used, probably hardly anybody be using it at all. And the feasibility study has already indicated that they will require an extra 100 car parks. What does that tell you? More traffic up and down these roads like Ryrie Avenue and Thelma Street. There are already rat runs between Canning Highway and Curtin University. This is only going to make the traffic situation worse, especially when we're saying we want 100 car parks, which means there's going to be more traffic. The environmental impact is, of course, this will create a heat island, as we've heard before. The water usage, the loss of trees is going to affect birds, such as the Carnaby cockatoo, which are a threatened species, and they need these trees to survive. What's the point of having a wonderful hockey field if you lose birds like that? Now, I'm not opposed to hockey. I think it's a wonderful sport, and it's great. I would have no trouble if they wanted to just use the Collie Reserve for playing hockey on a grass pitch. I don't have any trouble with that. But there is an alternative, and that is the upgrade to the Perth Hockey Stadium at Curtin University at a $135 million cost, which was announced by the government later last year. And that will consist of three new synthetic hockey pitches. You've already got one at Curtin University. So within a kilometre of Collie Reserve, you will have 4 synthetic hockey pitches. Why can't WASP use one of those? And the executive of this centre, Hockey Australia's chief executive, David Pryles, said the centre, this new centre, would be the best hockey facility in the world. And I emphasise, while it'll serve the wider hockey community, as well as the Hockeyroos and Kookaburras. And that's quoted from Aus Stadiums on the 5th of December 2022. So they're saying this facility, 4 now synthetic hockey pitches within 1 kilometre of Collie Reserve. Why can't WASP use one of those? So I say, keep Collie Reserve for public use. This beautiful open area of land. They are becoming less and less. If we keep filling them up with clubs, there won't be any public areas left. These are really precious areas in a time when the whole area is moving to higher density. It's not a good idea environmentally, and we believe we have a solution which will be good for WASP and it will be good for the community in keeping this Collie Reserve for public use.
That's your deputation, Mr. Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr. Rosenberg this evening? Councillor Cridland?
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg, for your presentation. I noticed your pictures of the fence and keep out and reference to a single-use club and the heat from the synthetic surface. That's exactly the situation at the South Perth Tennis Club, isn't it?
South Perth Tennis Club, I don't know whether they have a...
Their fences are just that high, aren't they?
Yes, I can see your point, Councillor Gridlin, but the point is here, we have an open space already. What we're doing is removing more open space.
And that area...
For the public.
That area was entirely open space until the city moved the South Perth Tennis Club from Windsor Park to that public open space, just as it suggested to WASPs they should move from Richo to Collie Roval.
Look, I can see your point, Councillor Gridlin, but really, yes, you can have spaces used for bowling clubs, bridge clubs, yes, tennis clubs. That's fine, but also the council has to consider open spaces which are purely there for the community for wider use. And that's what we're arguing here, is this leave this space for the community use, for wide open use. If we keep arguing that every time a club wants to use a public open space, what about down the foreshore there? Why don't we put a squash centre or something like that all along there? Let's fill that up with clubs as well. Where are we going to have spaces eventually for the public
Why
to use?
should the WASPs Hockey Club be treated any less than the South Perth Tennis Club or the Hensman Tennis Club, or the Manning Tennis Club, or the Manning Bowls Club,
Because they
or
have
the
an option.
Como Bowls Club?
Hold on, folks. So, Councillor Quidland, I'll let you finish your question and then Mr Rosenberg can answer.
Or the Croquet Club, or any of the other single-use facilities, in particular the ones that have synthetic surfaces and fences. Why should WASPs be treated worse than those clubs, which are in many cases much newer?
Because WASP have an option. We have 3 synthetic turfs going to be built at Curtin University as a part of a $135 million a deal from the government. That's 3. There's already 1 there, so there'll be 4. Now we want 1 at Collie Reserve. So within 1 kilometre, we'll have 5 synthetic turfs. 5 synthetic turfs within. Can't these people learn to share? You know, so that, you know, the 3 at Curtin University, they could share that. Already the head of the Hockey Association, Hockey Australia's chief executive, has said this was built to serve the wider community. There is options. We don't need to keep building hockey synthetic turfs all over the place. In some countries in the world, I believe in some African countries, they only have 1 in the whole country.
I might interject here just for a moment, folks, and just remind all participants that for the elected members, this is an opportunity to ask succinct questions of deputies, and the deputies will answer those questions, but we're not really entering into a debate in this forum. So with that, I'll ask if there's any other elected members wish to ask any further questions of Mr Rosenberg. No. Thank you for your time, Mr Rosenberg.
Thank you, councillors.
I'd now like to invite Mr Benedict McCarthy of Mount Pleasant, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 10.3.2. Welcome, Mr McCarthy.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, elected members and city staff. I feel that after the deputation's already made this evening that this is going to be a little bit simpler and less polarising for the committee. We'll see how we go. My name is Benedict McCarthy and I'm representing the owner and centre operator of the proposed childcare on Dyson Street. You might be aware the subject site is already in a desperate state of disrepair and falling into urban blight. There have already been several instances of vandalism and breaking and entering to both the Heritage Church and Heritage Hall. Until we obtain development approval, the city has informed us that there is very little that we can do to proceed with this project. Therefore, we implore the council to support this proposal so we not only restore the buildings back to their former glory, but raise them as a new focal point for the local community, its families, and to stand as an example of how high quality and uncompromising design can be integrated in and with enhancing heritage buildings. The external facade of both the Heritage Hall and Church will remain unmodified and fully renovated to a very high quality finish. The essential new additions are at the rear corner of the subject site in order to reduce the impact of the additions to the streetscape and so not to detract from the restoration and beauty of the heritage buildings. The proposed new additions have been designed to complement the existing heritage buildings by taking the form of the existing buildings and using modern materials. We do not intend to try to match the existing buildings as this is rarely successful, but instead create a synergy between the old and the new. All the existing trees on the site that are in good or good enough health are to be retained and brought back to very good health during the construction phase of this project. This includes the large jacaranda in front of the site between the 2 heritage buildings and the large tree in the rear northeastern corner and the fruit trees and all the existing street trees. Significant new planting and landscape will be undertaken across the site to soften the environment and improve the greenery of the site more significantly and healthily than it has been for many, many years. Additionally and importantly, the rose garden in front of the church that is currently a war memorial is to be saved and replanted in the corner truncation of the site and brought back to its original stunning condition. The memorial plaque will also be relocated so the general public will be able to view, enjoy and remember that rose garden and what the rose garden commemorates. The existing 17 verge bays are to be retained with no additional parking on site. As the proposed childcare centre only requires 15 bays, the available existing parking that was constructed for the church and hall is more than sufficient. The provision of any additional car parking within the site will only have a detrimental impact on the built heritage of the site and the retained trees within the site that this childcare seeks to retain, restore and nourish. It is very important to note that during the public consultation period, very few submissions were received, with some actually being in support of this proposal. Given the extent of objections other recent childcare centre proposals have received in the area, we understand the submissions received for our application to be a very clear and vocal response of strong community support. Acoustics is a primary concern for the city, of which several measures will be taken to ensure acoustic compliance of this proposal through both the construction and operational stages. The city has presented significant acoustic conditions to be applied to the development approval, for which the centre owner and owner of the property have the utmost confidence they will achieve. The owner of the subject site is not only the developer of the site, but they are also the owner and operator of the childcare centre, and they'll hang their hat on their name. They are a small boutique operator with strong ideologies in teaching children to have principles in the ethics for the care of the environment, the understanding of nature, sustainability, the arts, personal well-being, inclusion and diversity. Their aim is to promote children's learning and development while ensuring a sense of belonging and fostering positive social relationships. We as a team have worked tirelessly on this project for almost 2 years and trust that you, the elected members, see the great opportunity to retain these heritage buildings and the enormous positives this proposal proposes. Both the design review panel and the local community have already spoken and have great support for this proposal. We look forward to your full support for this proposal and endorse the officer's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr McCarthy. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr McCarthy this evening? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr McCarthy, for your deputation. I'll just wait.
Yeah, that's right.
May I just wait? Yeah, thanks. Yes, you may want to take this on notice, in which case you can email council if you so wish a response. So what are your views of a condition of approval where, in consultation with the city, an interpretive heritage sign is, or plaque or whatever is placed in the truncated area at the corner of the two streets? What will your views on that be?
Yeah, look, we have actually spoken about that as a team. I think there is actually an existing plaque in front of the church as it stands, so that will certainly be retained. But if it's the city's desire to further have commemorative representation of the history of the site, that's something we can certainly consider and would have no objection to.
Any further questions for Mr McCarthy, councillors? Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Mr McCarthy. Just a point of clarification, in your deputation, did you mention that there was adequate parking to comply with parking requirements on the site for this proposal?
Yes, so based on the number of children being 54 and 10 staff members, up to 15 car bays were required for this development, if it was a new development with new buildings. Given that there is an existing heritage hall and church on site, there are 17 existing bays in the verge on both Dyson Street and Vista Street combined, in both very good condition and comply with current Australian standards in terms of dimensions and accessibility. They are going to be retained. There was discussion about adding additional car bays on the site, but that was only going to have impact on either removing trees or impacting the quality of the heritage of the retained buildings.
Great, thank you very much. And just a further follow-up question, just with regard to the heritage of the actual buildings themselves, could you share any ideas as to what you'd be doing to actually preserve the heritage and enhance the buildings at all?
The externals of both buildings will be retained back to their former glory. The existing hall, which is the older of the building, which is a timber frame, timber lap panel, that will be restored back to its original condition. There will be a slight modification to the front, what do you call it, the front portico, I guess, because it's actually quite low. And that's purely to comply with current Australian and BCA standards. Other than that, they'll remain unchanged. The changes will be internal. It'll be internal fit out to create internal sleeping rooms for the children. But will be largely left open. The original windows will be retained. There will be some acoustic panelling put inside to reduce the amount of noise, given they are halls and are built to create acoustics, to keep them within the quiet policy for acoustic developments for commercial properties. And then, but the majority of the development would be in the rear corner, where there'll be a new classrooms built and an upper floor for the staffing. That will be in the back corner, so it'd be out of view from the street and also reduce the impact on the adjoining neighbours. But in terms of the retained heritage buildings, very little will be done to change them from their current appearance. They'll simply be improved back to what they originally were.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy.
Any further questions for Mr. McCarthy this evening, councillors? No. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you very much.
I'd now like to invite Mr. Craig McDonald of South Perth, who is speaking against the officer recommendation on item 10.3.3. Welcome, Mr. McDonald.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for listening to me. I speak on behalf of my wife. She can't be here tonight. She's had a prior engagement at the high school with my son. So I'll read this verbatim in her words. I'd like to address the proposed cafe at the address of 60 Elizabeth Street, South Perth. Firstly, I've been made aware that the proposed address currently sits under zoning of R80. This is a residential zoning, so I'd like to understand how a commercial business could be signed off when firstly it does not fit within the zone as it is. If a change is to be made for them to move forward, the zoning should be rezoned before any proposal is able to be seriously assessed. As a resident of Lawler Street, only houses back from the proposal site, I'm deeply concerned about the impact of this business to our quiet pocket of this suburb. I make it clear that I object emphatically, as the impact of such a business, I believe, will change the ability for residents who reside here, the lifestyle we have enjoyed, and gave reason as to why we purchased here in the first place. As a mum to 2 boys, one of my greatest concerns is the impact on their ability to continue to play safely in our front yard. Many afternoons are spent playing basketball and jumping on the trampoline, something we value highly. Increased traffic on key times such as after school and weekends will see the affordability of living on a quiet dead-end street almost impossible. I raised that years ago, in the 1990s from what I'm told. The residents of Lawler Street and Elizabeth Street fought to have the Elizabeth Street and Canning Highway intersection closed due to the traffic flow disruptions and safety concerns. Since then, this area has become a low traffic area and residents have enjoyed the peace that this dead end created. One thing that has remained has been that it is on the bike map path as the best route to the river. Having a business such as a cafe/restaurant built at the very dead end will cause parking congestion and see patrons having to find parking further back onto the streets and on residential verges. I refer to other similar businesses such as Little Banksia in Kensington and Tribute Kitchen Cafe in Shelley. Both cafes see patrons parking well away on side streets, and Tribute Kitchen in Shelley has even impacted the bordering shopping precincts car park in which they have had to take action with signage that cafe residents are not to park there. In the minutes from May 23rd, 2023, it is stated that the parking allocation of 11 bays meets the requirements. I would like you to expand your minds on this. 11 car parks, 5 residents on the units, 4 residents on the units. The remaining 6 have 3 allocated for staff, which in the minutes also states there will be a minimum of 3 full-time staff with the possibility of casual staff. This leaves 3 for patrons, 1 which would need to be marked for disabled use. What's left is 2 car spaces for the remaining patrons of a potential 24 seating capacity, figures which I've not had confirmed. The overflow parking spoken of in the minutes at Council's last meeting is often occupied by young adults of residents in the immediate vicinity, as well as residents and visitors to the units and apartment blocks adjacent. I ask, what was this parking designated for in the first place? Were they required when the units adjacent on Elizabeth Street were under proposal? If they were part of the requirement for the apartments, then how can it be claimed as supporting evidence for this cafe proposal? Outside of the proposal requirements being met, I question whether the TIS assessed the increase of bicycles, e-scooters and foot traffic, not just automobiles accessing the proposed business. As stated at last council, that there will be a key target of walk-up and takeaway patrons. Without a doubt, we'll see an increase, which will see an impact on the residents. Considering there is specified bicycle bays at the business, this needs to be considered as well, if not already done so. There is already concern around the way in which vehicles often speed up Lawler and Elizabeth Street. An increase of traffic will come with an increase in safety concerns. I do believe that there will be a major incident with visibility of e-scooters, bicycles and pedestrians at risk. Who then becomes responsible, as this is already highlighted as a major concern? Does that leave the council open to a lawsuit if the concerns are ignored? If overflow traffic banks onto residential verges, which I have no doubt it will due to the minimal parking at the cafe, it will only be a matter of time before someone is seriously injured or killed. Especially once it becomes dark at night, as visibility is extremely low. Councillor Navard, you state that you will work for improved safety for our neighbourhoods and cohesiveness of this community. I plead to this. I ask that you allow my family and my neighbours' families to continue to enjoy our quiet and safe pocket of South Perth and not put our safety and others' safeties at risk. I now address antisocial behaviour. It is stated in the report, there has been no evidence to suggest that there will be an increase in antisocial behaviour and crime as a result of the proposed use. At this current location, there has been no issue as the current businesses surrounding this area do not operate in the hour in which generally antisocial behaviour occurs. If you would like to make an educated decision on this, I implore you to seek feedback from the fast food area at Berwick Street and Canning Highway. A close friend of mine who worked at McDonald's can report the antisocial behaviour after events such as football games, concerts, cricket matches, etc. sees patrons pouring in at the conclusion of events, intoxicated, hyped up, loud and inconsiderate. They hang out in the parking lot and inside the business. If this business becomes another possible location as people step off the bus after these events, then this would be where you would make your comparison. I also suggest you consider that there is no evidence due to the fact that there is no comparable options currently at this intersection. On the applicability of this business due to surrounding businesses, I highlight the fact that all businesses surrounding Douglas Avenue / Canning Highway, such as Sprollo Cafe, Subway, Red Rooster, Love Beauty, Niles for Hair, Tokay Boutique, 777 Pharmacy, and other businesses, with the exception of Sardelic Real Estate, all have access off the major highway or major streets, not small residential streets like Lawler Street and Elizabeth Street. This proposal is set back in a residential location, not proud like other businesses on the Canning Highway. I also addressed the submission to the proposal received by Council. It states there were 13 submissions in which all were against this going ahead, not one in support. I raise this as it appears the people of South Perth are well serviced by businesses such as the proposed. If this was a business that was needed in our city, then people would be riding in support, not just against. I am not against progress. I understand Councillor D'Souza and Councillor Ward are keen to see progress in this wonderful suburb, and I do as well. I love seeing Angelo Street being revitalised. As someone who formerly worked on Menn Street, I very much look forward to seeing Civic Heart complete with its cafes and restaurants and other boutique businesses established. They are already existing precincts that will benefit from this development. A dead-end pocket is not an appropriate location for accessing a business of this kind. Ask yourself honestly, if you purchased a home here knowing this was a quiet and safe area, would you welcome in a business that would disrupt this, even a small disruption? As Councillor Russell states, that as a councillor with experience in engineering, that planning be reasonable, fair and thorough when assessing proposals. So I ask, whilst sitting here today, standing, does this pass as reasonable, fair and thorough to the residents, especially those in the immediate area? And Councillor Cridlin, I address your desire to continue to see this area remain a thriving community in such a beautiful environment. Well, today, a community is saying no. We may be few, but we are the community. As someone who works here in Como, who is involved in sporting groups, schools, and heavily utilises the parks and visits the businesses, this is not the right location for this proposal. Although the proposal meets all standards, one assessment that seems to be continually missed in the minutes and from the meeting I had with Fiona Mullen, Mary Choi and Ken Manalas on Friday, June 9th, is the impact such business is going to have on residents. I've heard a lot about the proposal requirements and that the proposal officer cannot consider the viability of such business or the impact to residents. So I ask each one of you to be the voice of reason, the voice of common sense and wisdom. Don't just tick boxes, consider the actual people that are impacted. If access to the business came off Canning Highway, it could be a whole different conversation. But reopening the Elizabeth Street intersection will not happen. As it was stated, there is no scope to change the address as the site does not directly abut Canning Highway. One final statement. I spoke with many people and asked their position. For those who were against the proposal, many felt not to write to council stating that council do not listen. The residents have become disillusioned with the people who are meant to represent them. I was one of them. I speak only for myself today, but know many agree with me. I plead that you restore the faith of the people you represent. I remind you, 13 submissions against, 0 submissions for the proposal. Thank you for your time and hearing my wife's concerns and positions on this proposal.
Thank you, Mr McDonald. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr McDonald this evening? That's a no. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you all.
I'd now like to invite Nick Zeradin, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, of South Perth, who is speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.3. Did I pronounce your name right, sir?
You did, that's fine.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Hi, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity for me to speak tonight. I'm a resident of South Perth, and I live within that immediate area of where this proposal of the cafe is going to be. I think for me, there's the concern around, firstly, the disrupting a piece of the community. This is a residential area that this proposed cafe is going to be, and there's grave concerns around the establishment attracting antisocial behaviour and also noise after hours. I also question the concept of a coffee and a healthy food establishment outlet that's operating 7 to 11, 7 days a week after hours. So I think there's concerns there. I'm also a parent of 2 young children, so there's concerns around safety. I think one of the things that the report fails to recognize is that the access road is significantly narrowed by verge parking, and it also, Lawless Street serves as a very busy bike path for a lot of the commuters that go from Canning Highway down to the foreshore. The other thing about the Lawless Street or the access into the cafe is that it's a slightly uphill road where vehicles tend to, coming from either direction, tend to speed up generally. And this is a concern for my kids. With the added verge parking or the added traffic, there's limited visibility. It's already a busy cyclist path with cyclists and also e-scooters. And the demographic of that street, so I sent my daughter into Mosaic as well. It's filled with young families and elderlies as well. So, everyone's kind of got used to the fact that it's a cul-de-sac to the end of the street, and now with heavier traffic, there's grave concerns around safety. The other thing is around traffic congestion as well, given that there's no direct access from Canning Highway. That's going to direct a lot more traffic through Lawler, through Elizabeth Street into the establishment. I think the comment around parking has already been made, where it's inadequate, and also reduce the parking availability for the nearby residents. I feel that there's already adequate facilities in surrounding areas, which already has direct access from Canning Highway. I think if there are patrons that are looking for evening options, there's the Como Hotel, there's plenty of restaurants and cafes along Canning Highway. And if you're looking for a cafe during the day, there's, a lot of options around Angelo Street and other parts of South Perth as well. So I think I'd like to finish with stressing the importance of the safety of the community and also the risk around, having the antisocial crowds and so forth into the area unnecessarily. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Zeradin. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr Zeradin this evening? That's a no. Thank you very much for your deputation. And I would like just to take a moment to welcome our local member of the Legislative Assembly, Mr Jeff Baker. Welcome. It's good to see you here tonight. All right. That brings us to item 10, which is the draft June reports. So I now hand you over to the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Mike Bradford, to take you through the balance of the draft June reports.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.1.1, Colliery Reserve Hockey Facilities Feasibility Study. This report presents the Colliery Reserve Hockey Facilities Feasibility Study Report.
Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I have a number of questions. So first one, if at the end of the proposed lease term, or for some reason the applicant needs to walk away from using the hockey centre, who's ultimately responsible for the costs to dispose of the stadium and return the site, including the grass pitches to existing state, that is a grassed area at the existing levels? Is it the WASPs, Wesley Joint Venture, the city, or the state government?
Ms. Shaw, can I send that one your way?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It ultimately depends on the terms of any lease agreement that the city would enter into with the WAFs. But typically what would happen is that the infrastructure would be the responsibility of the city to maintain in perpetuity, including asset renewal and replacement costs associated with that. So effectively where there's hard infrastructure that's been developed on public open space, it would be the responsibility of the city to maintain. And if I can also just clarify and add to that point, the reserve itself is Crown land, but it's vested to the city. So the responsibility for assets on that reserve doesn't fall back to the Crown, given the vesting to the city.
Yes, I understand that from DC, whatever that DC is number. Can I continue? So I understand that the JV is requesting a lease over Colliery Reserve. I'm still not clear to exactly the extent of that, what the area is. Could you, under your discussions with the JV, can you provide me with a bit more clarification?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as part of the feasibility report itself, it provides indicative plans that show the potential location of the turf itself, as well as potential additions to the club rooms and infrastructure to that effect. If the city was to proceed with the proposal, there would need to be detailed designs drawn up for the actual facility, which would need to be surveyed so we can actually establish the extent of the lease area that would otherwise be entered into.
So just to clarify then, the lease area would just be for the artificial turf with the clubhouse and not for the grassed pitches, which there's two on Colliery Reserve.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We haven't entered into any of those negotiations with the JV.
Okay. Right, so noting that that's unclear, and noting that, basically the city would not be in a position to lease or to charge out the area of the hockey turf, what would be a reasonable sort of per annum lease to the city?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So under the current council policy, it's $1,000 per annum.
Okay. Another question. So I understand that the Water Corp is more likely than not to reduce our water licence allocation, which would include Colliery Reserve. Is the Water Corp also likely to place other limitations on water use, for example, extending the season and times when water cannot be used? And in addition, would there be an overuse fine at all?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the current allocation for that portion of the reserve, including the surrounding streetscapes and the nursery, is $20,000 per annum. To maintain a turf like this, you'd be looking at between 5,000 to 10,000 kilolitres per annum for the turf alone, which was figures that were provided by the proponents in the feasibility report itself. In terms of the allocation moving forward, the city understands that Water Corp would be reducing the water licence allocations. However, there hasn't been any further advice in terms of additional restrictions that may otherwise be imposed.
I understand that water licence extends beyond Colliery Reserve. It includes a number of other reserves. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that's correct. It includes the surrounding streetscapes and the city's nursery.
Right, okay, thank you. So I guess another water question. So for the proposal, who has ultimate control of the reticulation system with respect to pumping from the aquifer?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That would be subject to the lease agreements and the terms in that respect.
Okay. For the Northwest Science and Residential component of the Curtin Bentley ACP, being an area within the City of South Perth's boundary, could the city advise the expected residential population of such?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the actual dwellings that could otherwise be accommodated within that area are unknown at this point in time. And the reason being is the land is currently zoned Technology Park under Town Planning Scheme number 6, but is proposed to be zoned RACO under Draft Local Planning Scheme number 7. And what that means is that a structure plan needs to be developed, either in conjunction with the state government, the city, and likely Town of Victoria Park as well. We would provide advice and recommendation to the West Australian Planning Commission on the ultimate subdivision layout that's provided as part of that future structure plan. So the dwelling yield itself cannot be calculated until such time that we know the proposed road layout as part of that. But I do note that the current planning framework does require a minimum of 10% of the gross subdivisible area to be provided as public open space. The actual distribution of that public space will be subject to the design provided as part of the structure plan. So it may not be one consolidated area of public open space. And in fact, given the area, it's more likely to be localised small and neighbourhood level size parks around 5,000 square metres.
So would that public open space be passive rather than active?
Typically, through you, Mr. Mayor, typically local and neighbourhood sized parks range from around 800 to 5,000 square metres and provide for passive recreation purposes only. District level open space would otherwise provide for sporting facilities, and they're typically at around 10,000 square metres.
Okay, thank you. So just my last question, is the site fully compliant with appropriate legislation to demonstrate that it is uncontaminated? I mean, if the site is not compliant with legislation, how does this impact the proposal?
Ms Amprimo, should I send that one your way?
So the records that the city has for the site indicate that there has been no landfilling activities in the past. If they were to identify any contamination through any project there, then they would have to follow the contaminated sites process. But we have no records that indicated it was used as a landfill.
Could you can you just give us a brief of what that process would be for the applicant?
If it became apparent that it was in fact a contaminated site, the Contaminated Sites Act requires that to be notified, and you would have to go through a process to reclassify the site and potentially go through some kind of remediation, which would broadly be sort of a couple of years and involves an independent auditor reviewing a study of the contamination, the extent of it, the remediation required, and any restrictions on future use of the site.
Okay, and thank you. Well, there was a last question on notice, but I do know the answer to that one, so I won't say it here. Thank you.
Any further questions for the administration? Councillor D'Souza.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just trying to refresh my memory of the history of this issue. The initial proposal, or when it was sort of floated, was a relatively modest one. Do we know how it's, I guess, now come to an almost $15 million proposal? Because it seems quite different in character to what was, I guess, at least what I understood this process was at 2-3 years ago.
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in terms of the history of the site itself, in 2015, there was a spatial design study undertaken for the development of just a synthetic turf at Richardson Park. And as councillors would be aware, there was a proposal at the time to locate the South Perth train station adjacent to the reserve. And so there was a need for the club to potentially relocate if it was seeking to have the grass facilities as well as the synthetic turf. And that was the rationale behind the initial investigations into whether or not the club could be relocated. In terms of the proposal ranging from $4.6 million in 2018 to 2019, the actual details in terms of the scope of what the club is requesting hasn't actually changed. However, as a result of external factors and the applicant's own feasibility report that was recently submitted in November 22, the cost then escalated to $14.8 million. And so the city has sought some further clarification from the proponents as to why the costs have escalated to that extent. And we are yet to receive further information in that respect. But in terms of the drafting of the report itself, we can only rely on the advice that was provided in the feasibility report. I note that that figure was provided to the proponents from an independent quantity surveyor as well. So we've basically provided our recommendations within the report based on the figures provided in the feasibility study.
Councillor Warland.
Thank you, Mayor. As I understand it, WASP are asking us to contribute towards the underground power element of it and also some car park stuff. Is that work that would reasonably be expected to have to be undertaken at some point in the medium to long term future anyway for the use of that site?
Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the club had originally just in terms of some of the commentary that was made tonight with respect to the 50-50 between Wesley and the WASPs themselves, that amount referred to the development of the synthetic turf itself, upgrades to the club room, as well as the grass turf at Collier Reserve. So what the club was seeking from the city was a contribution towards upgrades to the turf and grass lighting, sinking of the power lines, contribution towards upgraded clubhouse construction, as well as contributions towards the car park. The commentary in terms of the viability of the project from the city doesn't necessarily relate to whether or not there would be a contribution made by Wesley towards the development of the synthetic turf. It relates to some of the ongoing asset costs and renewal of that type of facility, in addition to some of the incidental features that I've just mentioned earlier. So in terms of the sinking of the overhead power lines itself, that would be scoped out through the underground power program in any instance. But in terms of the timing of that project and at what point in time a contribution would need to be made, that has an impact on the viability of the project itself now.
Councillor Brenda Brownus, did I see a hand up there?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I have a few questions with regard to this and following on from Councillor Warland. Just with regard to the car parks, I see that's indicated that the proponent has indicated the city would actually be wearing that cost. So for the size and scale of the car park required, did we have an indicative amount as to what that cost might look like?
Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the required amount of bays that was indicated in the report was an additional 150 bays. The city would be unable to provide a detailed cost estimate for that on the basis that the actual location of the car parking bays would otherwise be unknown at this point in time. Because if you were to extend the existing car parking bays southeast, that obviously intersects with the city's current nursery operations, and if there was a proposal to extend bays around the perimeter of the existing reserves, that would result in removal of existing infrastructure and potentially the trees that line the reserve. So without knowing the exact location and the extent of the works, it's difficult to provide a cost estimate as to the construction cost of the bays.
Thank you very much. And just a following up question, with regard to the operating cost of maintaining the car park. So previously, we've had discussions about the Birch Street car park and the ongoing operational costs of that. And I think from memory, it was quoted about $70,000 a year to actually maintain that car park with regard to staff, cleaning, labour. Is there any indication as to what the operating maintenance cost the city might incur with a car park of that scale?
Is it to Ms Amprimo or Mr Adams? Ms Amprimo.
Yeah, I'll have to take that and notice. I wouldn't know off the top of my head what the cost of that car park would be.
Thank you. Thank you. A few more questions, if I may. With the loss of the 43 trees, has the proponent indicated that they might actually compensate that mitigating loss by planting additional trees to enhance and maintain canopy cover?
Ms Shaw?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
This evening, it was also mentioned that the Wesley South Perth Hockey Club sort of indicated that the unused funds with regard to the RAF, so roughly $10 million was quoted. Just wondering if there's any indication or any conversations with them about that sort of scale of funding, or if that's just a new comment that we're aware of.
Mr Bradford?
That was news to me.
Thank you. And my final question is just with regard to the discussions with Hockey WA. Has the city had any conversations with them with regards to the potential use or access of the High Performance Hockey Centre at Curtin?
Ms Shaw, should I send that one to you?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. So the city hasn't engaged directly with Hockey WA other than as part of the initial pre-feasibility of the report. But what we have done is encouraged the proponents to actually liaise with Hockey Australia on the proposal and to see whether they could gain access to this. So whilst the city could effectively advocate on their behalf to Hockey Australia or to Curtin for the future use, it's more appropriate that those negotiations occur between the club and Curtin or in discussions with Hockey WA.
Any further questions for the administration on this item tonight, folks? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just for clarification, my understanding for the upgrade of the Felmer Street car park was the demolition of the pavilion there and to expand the car park into that space. Is that correct?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That was one option that was presented as part of the pre-feasibility. However, detailed design drawings have not been provided for either the facility itself or where those bays would actually be located. So effectively, if it was to move to the next stage, we would be seeking those types of detailed design elements to provide a formal assessment for the purposes of detailed assessment effectively.
Any further questions on this item? Councillor Cridland.
Does the city understand the tie of playing games where your clubhouse is to the financial viability of a hockey club? And if so, how would that work if they are able to occasionally in between the Hockey Roos and the Kookaburras using the national facility, get the occasional use at Curtin of the high performance stadium, which is not located near their clubhouse and where the bulk of their members are playing on grass would work?
Who should I send that to? Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So yes, we certainly do understand the benefit that all sporting clubs would have via the use of the home turf next to club and especially bar and cafe facilities associated with the clubhouse itself. However, that's one consideration in light of all of the matters that have otherwise been contained within the report in terms of the city's assessment of the feasibility report that was presented.
Next question is going back to the history, and it is a long history, which I would think only I would have been around for, where the city was in contact with the state government about ceding part of Richardson Park for a South Perth train station, which now appears much less likely to occur. And in the context of WASPs speaking to the city about putting in a turf, were told to consider packing their bags and moving elsewhere for their clubhouse, their grass pitches and their turf, and noting that that train station looks less likely, at least in the foreseeable future. Does the city now have a preference as to where WASPs could be co-located with a turf? For example, Collier or Richardson now?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, the city does not have a preference. However, I would note in respect to Richardson itself, it wasn't simply a matter of the land that would otherwise be ceded for the future train station. There were also issues to do with the removal of trees and removal of existing car parking bays, because that is one matter that we did consider in light of the feasibility report itself as to whether they could simply remain at Richardson Park and construct the synthetic turf there. We would also advise against that just in terms of the capital investment itself when the future train station will occur at some point in future. So whilst it may not be within the next 5 to 10 years, for this level of capital investment into the construction of a synthetic turf and associated additional car parking bays, the city would advise against that when it may need to be removed in future.
If the capital expenditure is to be met by Wesley College and the club, then why would the city advise against it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's also to do with the ongoing costs in future in terms of asset replacement, which may not be met by the club, but it would set a reasonable expectation that that type of facility would exist there in perpetuity.
Any further questions, Councillor Cridland?
So, noting what I would say is the objective necessity of a successful hockey club, such as Wasps, which has a number of Olympians, to continue, the necessity of having a turf. Does the city have any proposal at all for a location where they can be co-located with a turf within the city?
Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's no location on any city public open space. We were encouraging the WASP to have further discussions with Curtin as to access to that turf, either the existing turf or the additional turf once constructed, and continue to use Richardson in terms of the grass.
Any further questions there, Councillor Cridland? All right. Councillor Russell?
Just one final one. Has there been any discussion with Xavier Hockey Club in terms of co-sharing an artificial turf?
Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, there has. There have been discussions not only by the city but also with the club, and unfortunately both clubs didn't want to share a facility.
Mr. Bradford, something to add?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say the feedback from the state government and in consideration of our policy that clubs where they can share facilities are more likely to gain support from the state government for funding and things like that as well.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions on this item for the administration this evening? That's a no. Next item, please, Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.3.1, Tender 5 of 2023, provision of turf, sports ground wicket and croquet maintenance. This report considers submissions received from the advertising of Tender 5 of 2023 for the provision of turf, sports ground wicket and croquet maintenance. The report will outline the assessment process used during the evaluation of tenders received and recommend approval of the tender that provides best value for money and level of service to the city. And I note there's a confidential attachment to this item.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Just a gentle reminder to all councillors that we'll try and keep our questions succinct and concise. Do we have any questions for the administration? Councillor Warland.
Thank you, Mayor. And noting, as Mr. Bradford said, there's a confidential attachment here, but it appears to me that some of the assessment here was not as focused on price as we're used to with other tenders. Is there any reason or any possibility to explain that, given it's confidential?
We can go behind closed doors at item 15 if we want to ask, and yeah, I might suggest we do that. So I'll just make a note to come back in item 15 to this item. Oh, Ms. Amprimo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Given that the nature of the question is fairly generic, I can answer that in public session. It is pretty common practice with most of our tenders to assess the non-price attributes and then not apportion a weighting to price itself. So this tender has been assessed consistently with that process.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.2, proposed change of use to child daycare centre and additions and alterations to buildings lot 53, number 50 Dyson Street, Kensington. To consider an application for development approval for a change of use to child daycare centre and additions and alterations to existing buildings at lot 53, number 50 Dyson Street, Kensington. This item is referred to council as the proposed use is a discretion with consultation land use within the public assembly zone and therefore falls outside of the delegation to officers. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended that the application be approved, subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In the deputation tonight, Mr McCarthy indicated that there was sufficient parking bays for this use. I'm just wondering if the administration could comment or have had subsequent conversations with Mr McCarthy as to how he came to adequate car bays, whereas this indicates a shortfall for parking.
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think that may just be a misunderstanding in terms of the statutory requirements for car parking versus the actual demand for car parking for the centre. So there's actually no car parking provided on the site. The proposal is wholly reliant on the use of the city's car parking bays within the adjacent road reserve. On page 21 of the agenda, it includes the city's assessment of car parking and traffic, which demonstrates that there's a total shortfall of on-site bays of 14 bays. However, for the reasons outlined in the report, we've considered that that shortfall is acceptable in this instance.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. And just one follow-up question. So there's no need for the city to actually increase parking at all adjacent to that operation, if that was to pass?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, the city, for providing the acoustic report. I note that in the acoustic report, it actually talks of the adjoining property as being the op shop, but it's now being developed as a residential area. So that might influence the allowable acoustic level and also the influence factor. I can take this on notice, but as the city actually considered that it's now a residential property rather than an op shop, which has a higher sort of allocation for acoustic level.
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So in terms of what the decibel levels would otherwise be required to be, it's based on the nearest proximity to noise-sensitive land uses, which can include additional shop uses adjacent to that. The distances that have been provided within the report, I understand, are reflective of the distance to the nearest opening adjacent to a sensitive land use. The variations that are provided in the noise regulations in terms of variances include things such as proximity to major distributor roads, as well as the proportion of commercial development within typically an 800-metre radius of the development itself. So the proposal and the operating hours would otherwise be within the allowable noise limits as provided under the regulations.
Thank you, Mr Shaw. Just another question. So following on to a question I had with the applicant. So is it possible under planning laws and the Local Government Act to include a condition of approval that an interpretive heritage signage at cost to the city, so at cost to the city, be supplied and installed on site in view of the public?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's actually an appropriate need and nexus for the applicant to provide at full cost the interpretive signage. The reason that the city didn't recommend a condition to that effect is because the current signage and what would typically be included on a place record signage like that is the management category of the place and the details provided in the existing place record under the local heritage inventory. The city's local heritage inventory is due to be reviewed and would instead be changed to a local heritage survey. The key difference in that is that the place is currently a Category B listing. Under the new framework, it would change to a Category 2 listing. And so there are minor details, not only through that, but through potential additional information that may be received under the review of the local heritage framework that would otherwise be incorporated into the sign. So we didn't want to make the applicant prepare a nice brass sign or something like that. That would otherwise be out of date within the next year.
Councillor Russell.
So in terms of that then, can we limit the interpreted signage to be the history of the location, the history of the buildings, and therefore not be subjective to change of any other kind of decision in the future?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, you could. And the draft wording provided for the condition that I provided to you would otherwise account for that. We can broadly say that it's subject to the satisfaction of the City of South Perth, and then we can be sure to not include any identifying details that would otherwise be updated in the place record.
Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have two questions here. One is, to what extent will the city have means of ensuring features such as the community-built walls of the church and the patchwork of bricks sourced at the time for those walls can be retained in the first instance, but then also preserved ongoing?
Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the plans that are provided as an attachment to the report detail the portion of walls that are to be removed and those that are to be retained. For those that are to be retained, the detailed drawings provided as part of the building permit application and the demolition permit will provide structural details as to what portions will be retained and how. So we can undertake a more detailed assessment at that point in time, including a comparison to potentially the approved development application plans. Given the extent of walls that were otherwise proposed to be removed, we didn't consider it necessary to include a condition that would otherwise require the retention and storage of those heritage materials to be used in another location. And in my experience, typically what happens when those conditions are imposed is that those materials end up stored at the local government's depot, effectively, and there's not necessarily an adaptive reuse for them. So in this instance, that type of condition was not recommended.
And I have a second question, please, Mr. Mayor. Some of these streets that connect to Canning Highway is used as a rat run for vehicles to beat the traffic flowing into Canning Highway from Berwick Street. What cautionary measures will be available to the city to ensure the safety of tiny children being unloaded from cars in the parking bays on Dyson and Vista Streets can prevail? Thank you.
Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in terms of the existing road network itself and the geometry of those roads, the city has no reason to believe that there is an existing safety concern. Certainly the signposted speed limits in that area is commensurate to an existing residential area. Whether people are complying with those is a matter for WA Police. In terms of how that could be addressed through this proposal, typically the operators of these facilities have their own internal management plans which detail things like how children will be dropped off and collected from the facility and how they also access the facility itself, which could seek to address any concerns to do with children running onto the road or in terms of the adjacent footpath. If there was an ongoing traffic issue or safety issue, which I don't believe there is in this location at this point in time, but if there was, the city could undertake monitoring of that location to see if there were any traffic calming devices that would otherwise need to be installed.
Any further questions for the administration on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.3.3, proposed cafe restaurant addition to multiple dwellings lot 174, number 60 Elizabeth Street, South Perth. to consider an application for development approval for a cafe restaurant addition to multiple dwellings on lot 174, number 60 Elizabeth Street, South Perth. This item is referred to council as the proposed use is a discretionary with consultation land use within the residential zone and therefore falls outside the delegation of officers. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended that the application be approved subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration? I think Councillor Manolis was first there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll start by saying on page 95 of the attachments showing the site plan, I was having trouble and wanted confirmation of the calculations. It states the area equals 83 metres square dining, including alfresco area, GFA, and underneath 35 by 5 equals 7 bays, by 45% equals 3.2 bays, save 4 bays. I wanted confirmation whether the dining area was in fact 35 square metres or 83 square metres, and part two of it was to do with the discounts, 15% for 400 metres from the bus stop, 20% for mixed use residential, 10% end of trip, giving a 45% total reduction. Upon looking upon the site plan, I'm unable to locate where the end of trip 10% reduction is located, being separate showers, one male and one female. Therefore, is the 10% valid reduction, and should the reduction be 35% instead?
Have you got all that, Ms Shaw, or should we go through them one by one? We do, okay.
No, I sent it in.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Manolis.
Thank you. So through you, Mr Mayor, the 83 metres squared is the gross floor area of the proposed development that was provided in the applicant's covering letter in support of the application. The way that car parking is calculated under Town Planning Scheme number 6 for a cafe restaurant land use is actually based on the dining area itself and not the gross floor area of the overall development. The applicant came back and amended the plan to state that that figure was actually 35 metres squared. And following some further discussion with the officers based on our own measurements of the proposed site plan, this was further reduced to 20.04 metres squared. In terms of Council Policy 315 car parking reductions, the way that the deductions are calculated, as Councillor Manolis has correctly pointed out, is to do with proximity to things like existing public car parking facilities, bus stops, and whether the site's a mixed-use site. So those overall deductions would equate to 0.85 times 0.95, which would otherwise result in a 0.646 reduction to the car parking calculation itself. That then equates to 5 less that amount, which is the actual amount provided in the report, which is the 4 car parking days.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Navard, I thought I saw your hand go up there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just have 2 questions, please. Should the council consider rejecting this proposal based on the level of concern within the local community, what would you advise would be the outcome?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the City has recommended support of the application for the reasons outlined in the report. We're satisfied that any matters that can otherwise be addressed, any matters that were otherwise raised during the course of the submission have adequately been assessed and are compliant with the scheme requirements, or can be appropriately addressed by conditions of development approval. And so for that reason, the City's recommended support.
Thank you. May I have a second question? Is there any kind of workaround solution that you might offer council for its deliberation? For example, negotiating for shorter trading hours or something of that type?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, it's certainly open for council to amend the draft recommendation to include a condition that otherwise reduces the hours of operation that have otherwise been proposed. Just to add some further commentary to this span of the hours itself, I believe from the applicant that the hours that have been proposed are as a result of not knowing who the future barista or operator of that cafe may otherwise be. And so by providing an expansive span of hours, it accommodates any future operator coming in and operating within those hours. I understand from the deputation and questions at the previous council meeting that there was concern that the facility may otherwise operate as a small bar. That's a separate land use that would require an additional development application for a change of use, as well as licensing through racing, gaming and liquor, and through section 39 and 40 certificates from the city.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Moss, I thought I saw Councillor Russell's hand go up earlier. Was that the case, Councillor Russell?
Yeah, I have a question. So I understand that the bike plan has a dedicated bike lane down Lawler Street. Do you know if that's been implemented as yet?
Ms Shaw or Ms Amprimo?
That dedicated bike lane is not currently in place. It is planned for the future as part of the cycling network.
Okay, so I guess the follow-on question would that require any removal of on-site parking bays?
I'm not sure who I should send that to. Is that Ms Amprimo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't believe it would, however, I would need to check the plans for that.
Thank you. Councillor Manolis, I saw your hand go up again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I still had several other questions to ask.
Ask away.
A further question relating to the dining area. Does the 20.04 square metres include the upper deck floor area? And should it be included in the dining area?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. From memory, it was only the area identified at the ground floor for al fresco, and the upper portion that had no seating identified on the plan and was almost a viewing platform was not included in that calculation.
The existing building, the existing two-storey building, apartment building, with ground floor parking for 3 cars, planned on the internet when the property was for sale, the sizes of the garages were shown as 2.7 by 6.4 metres, 3 metres by 6.4 and 2.7 by 4.6 metres. One, is there an Australian or West Australian standard size for garages?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The relevant standard for car parking bays is AS2 890.1. From memory, it's called off-street car parking facilities. Yes, so there is. The standard bay width for a single garage is typically 3 metres by 5.4. A double garage is 5.4 by 5.4. And that doesn't otherwise accommodate the manoeuvring areas surrounding those bays in itself. In terms of the existing bays provided that service the multiple dwellings, there's no requirement to otherwise bring existing bays up to current standards. They can still be used to contribute towards the bays required for the multiple dwelling without any amendments to that building.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No further questions, Councillor Manolis?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Councillor Russell, I saw your hand go up again.
Yes, thank you. So just a follow-on question so the upper deck is not to be used for dining purposes. So in order for the car parking policy to be valid, then would that require no dining services, no seating allowed on the upper deck?
Ms Shaw.
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
So would it then be an appropriate condition of approval for such in order for the parking to be valid?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reason a condition like that wasn't proposed is because the applicant hasn't proposed the use of the upper area for dining facilities, but we can include a condition like that for compliance and enforcement action if required.
Any further questions for the administration on this item tonight, folks? Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, it's along car parking as well. So the report indicates that there are 11 car bays and 5 would be for residential parking and 6 would be for staff and patrons. It also indicates that 3 FTE would be more or less dedicated for staff parking, and there would be additional casual staff using the car park in busier periods. So just taking that into consideration with the available 6 bays and the number of bays that may likely be used by existing FTE or additional casual staff during busy periods, is this adequate enough? And also given that there are some complexes on Elizabeth Street, so that's 61, 55 and 53, I think it is, quite large complexes, so the density is already quite high, obviously with limited parking on site. So I'm just a little bit concerned with regard to the adequacy of bays for this development.
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the city is required to assess the car parking requirements in accordance with the current scheme provisions. So a total of 11 bays are provided on the site. In terms of the breakdown of those bays, 4 are for the cafe restaurant, which includes those earlier deductions that I mentioned, and 5 are available for the multiple dwellings. The city is required to assess it against the scheme requirements, as I said. However, the city is not responsible for the actual allocation of the bays on the site between the strata company themselves. Our role is to ensure that the bays required for the number of multiple dwellings and for the proposed use is compliant with the codes, the R codes that is, and the scheme requirements. So in terms of our statutory assessment, there's actually a surplus of 2 car parking bays on the site. So it is compliant.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the administration on this item tonight? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.1, listing of payments May 2023. This report presents to Council a list of accounts paid under delegated authority between 1 May and 31 May for information.
Any questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.2, monthly financial statements, May 2023. The monthly financial statements are provided within attachments A through I, with a high level of analysis contained in the comments of the report.
Any questions for the administration on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.3, adoption of the annual budget 2023-2024. This report presents the draft annual budget 2023-24 as attached for adoption by Council. This year, all properties within the City of South Perth were subject to a revaluation carried out by the Valuer General as per the legislated 3-year cycle of revaluations. This revaluation results in movements in the gross rental value of each property and therefore adds a significant complexity to the rate setting process. This year, in order to fund the services provided to the community, the City is recommending a rates revenue increase of 5%, which is well below the CPI for March 2023 of 5.8%. Last year, Council adopted a rates increase of 4.5%, which is also well below the March CPI figure of 7.6%. Overall, for the last 5 budgets, including the one proposed, the City's rates increases total 10.5% against a cumulative year-on-year CPI increase of 17.6%. The City is recommending a rate in the dollar of 0.0730665 as compared to last year's rate in the dollar of 0.0813386, a reduction in excess of 10% to reflect the higher GRVs across the city. Over the past 4 months, Council has had 4 workshops with staff to discuss and understand the financial position of the city and develop a budget that works towards achieving a net operating surplus in the short to medium term. Returning the city to a net operating surplus position is essential for the long-term financial sustainability of the city. It enables funds to be directed to renewing ageing drainage, roads, playgrounds, other infrastructure and facilities, and allows services and amenities to be provided to the residents. In response to the need to renew and replacing existing assets, almost all of this year's capital works allocation is directed towards renewal and replacement projects rather than development of new assets.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item this evening? No? Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Item 10.5.1, Risk Management and Business Continuity Activity Report. This report outlines the activities undertaken by the City of South Perth, the city risk management function for the period of March 2023 to June 2023, and to provide an overview of the activities planned for the first quarter of the 23-24 financial year.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Any questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.5.2, Delegation DC 690, Town Planning Scheme 6. This report responds to a councillor request to review Delegation DC 690 following consideration of the annual review of council delegations at the ordinary council meeting held on the 28th of March 2023. The report considers the 5 proposed conditions as included in the amended motion and recommends the inclusion of 3 conditions.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Any questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.5.3, Corporate Business Plan 2023-24 to 26-27. This report presents the draft Corporate Business Plan 2023-24 through to 26-27 for consideration by council.
Any questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.5.4, Audit Register Progress Report Quarter 3. This report provides an update on the progress of actions included in the Audit Register. The Audit Register includes all open audit findings that have previously been accepted by the Audit Risk and Governance Committee and Council.
Any questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.5.5, Policy Review. The terms of reference of the Audit Risk and Governance Committee include responsibility for reviewing the city's policies. A number of policies are now presented for consideration of the committee and referral to council for adoption.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. For policy P609, where would a public and private education establishment fit into with respect to leasing arrangements? For example, where would the Wesley boat sheds fit, or even the Curtin boat sheds?
Mr Adams, should I send that your way?
So there's a section in the policy, I haven't got it in front of me at the moment, but there's a section that refers to not-for-profits, government bodies, committee and associations. So that would fit into that category there.
And that's for $1,000 lease per annum?
It's been changed to a minimum of $1,000.
Oh, okay, a minimum. So how would that possibly be increased? What factors would increase that?
So we'd make an assessment on what the use was and what the ability to pay was.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. Okay. That brings us to the end of item 10. Item 12 is motions of which previous notice has been given. That's nil for this evening. Ordinarily, we move to item 15, which is where the meeting would be closed to the public. We do have one confidential matter on the agenda, and we will close the meeting if anyone's got any questions on that item. Does anyone have any questions on the confidential item? Okay, we do have a question, so I guess we'll have to close the meeting at this point. For all of those in the gallery, hi Mr Baker. Thank you for your attendance and participation. I will have to close the meeting at this point because we will have to go behind closed doors. Afraid so. But you can stay in the lobby and come back afterwards. If we can just close the door, are we off live streaming? All right, so that concludes item 15. That brings us to item 16, which is closure. Before I close the meeting, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation. I declare this meeting closed at 8:49 p.m. Thank you all and good night.